Our next property type that we're going to take a look at is single family residential, or SFR. This is not a commercial real estate property type because it doesn't produce income, an income stream, but it's something important that we need to take a look at because most of you will hopefully own your own house, and single family residency homes compete against apartments. So it's important for us to understand what drives SFR. There are a couple different ways to classify single-family residential properties. I'm going to go over the two most common, which are ownership and style. So on this slide, we see ownership classifications. The first type of ownership classification is called a condominium or a condo. So a formal definition is that a condo is a large property complex comprised of fee ownership of separate units of multi-unit buildings and an undivided interest in common areas. But remember, condo ownership is not exclusive to residential properties and is often found in regards to office and sometimes retail properties. Now, most people are familiar with condos. Their grandparents or their parents own a condo down in Florida or someplace south, but that's the most common type. But remember that you can have an office condo or a retail condo. The next type of ownership style is what's called a cooperative or co-op. This is a form of ownership in which an owner owns stock in a company and the company owns the building. The stockholder also receives a proprietary lease in a specific apartment and is obligated to pay monthly rate charges that represent the proportional share of operating expenses and debt service on the underlying mortgage, which is paid by the corporation. This proportional share is based upon the proportion of the total stock owned. Okay, so the difference between a condo and a cooperative is that if you own the condo, you actually own real estate. In a cooperative, you own a share in a company, and that company owns the building. And lastly, this is the most common type of ownership. It's a fee simple ownership of a house, which basically means, if you go back to our first lecture, that you have every single right in all the bundle of rights. The next classification type for single family residential is by style. And so on this slide, in the next couple slides, you'll see different styles. The first style is what's called a bungalow. This is typically a small single-story home with probably a front porch. Usually has a dormer window built into the roof of the attic. Next is a ranch that's in the middle of the slide. Typically, those are single-story homes. Now, ranches are becoming much more popular, or coming back into popularity, just because the demographics of the United States are getting older, and people do not want to or can't climb upstairs. So having a house or all their living space on a single floor, single story, is very attractive. And lastly, on this page, we have a cottage. And these typically feature wood siding, have a small porch, and sometimes have a fireplace. Okay, so continuing on with styles, the next style is a bi-level or split level, and this is very common around the United States. It's a home with multiple levels. It has a split level entryway open to 2 levels and typically requires stairs to access each level. A bi-level home's entryway usually open onto only one floor. So we got a picture on the top of here. This is a split level, and this is a bi-level. Again, oftentimes you find these all over the United States. Continuing on our styles, different styles. You have mansions. These are usually large homes that have more than 5,000 square feet. You have townhomes. These typically have 2 or more floors and are set side by side. Other townhomes that form a tight row that go down the street. And then you've got this phenomenon called tiny homes. These are very small homes, usually between 100 and 400 square feet. So in some houses, that's a large closet, and they can be mobile, but are sometimes stationary. All right, so let's talk about some key concepts from a single-family residence. I have to do a lot with definitions. So we talked about acre before. An acre is 42,560 square feet. There's a concept called at-risk capital, and this is the total amount of money that can be lost at any time. So if you basically make a down payment and the bank comes in and pays for the remainder or capitalizes for the remainder of the purchase, your at-risk capital is what you have, your deposit amount. That's the money that you could lose. Earnest money, typically sellers of single-family houses will ask for earnest money, which is sort of a small, non-refundable payment, and you typically do not get that back. That is to show the seller that you are really interested and you're in earnest. You're interested enough that you're going to give up some money. Going hard, that basically means that you have made a non-refundable payment. So on big deals, as soon as you go hard on your $10 million on a $100 million purchase, there's no way you can get that $10 million back. So we've got the concepts of gross acreage and net developable acreage. So the gross acreage is the total acreage at the time of purchase, but not all of that probably can be developed. Maybe part of it is a lake, or maybe it's protected from an environmental perspective. So net developable acreage basically admits major streets, open spaces, floodplains, and other major easements that could significantly affect the project. So I want to introduce you to the concept of household. This is very, very, what a household is very important to single-family residences as well as to multifamily, or when we take a look at apartments, because growth in households and household formation are strong indicators of demand for both SFR as well as for apartments. So let's get a definition. A household includes all the people who occupy a housing unit, such as a house or an apartment, as their usual place of residence. A household includes the related family members and all the unrelated people, if any, such lodgers, foster children, wards, or employees who share the housing unit. A person living alone in a housing unit, or a group of unrelated people sharing a housing unit, such as partners or roomers, is also considered a household. The count of households excludes group quarters, and this is a definition by U.S. Census. So basically, you think of a family living in one place. That's typically a household. When you graduate from Miami and you go off and you work on your own and you don't have a roommate, you one person would be considered a household from the U.S. Census perspective, because you represent something that's demanding some sort of shelter, either an apartment or buying your own house. Okay, let's continue on with our terms. The next term is net usable acreage. So this is slightly different from net developable because it omits interior street right-of-ways, alleys, and any other areas that aren't actually for sale or for rent. When you start to develop single-family residences and even commercial properties, you typically will receive a construction loan. And this is debt obtained from a lender during the construction phase of the development. There are different risks in development versus a building that's already rented. So when you get a construction loan, it considers or takes into account these additional risks. And there are different structures for construction loans than there would be for just a normal loan for an already existing building. Now, those construction loans are typically taken out or refinanced with permanent financing or something called a takeout loan. So this is debt obtained from a lender that pays off the construction loan and finances the property through its operational phase. There's a type of funding called a purchase money notes. This is when the seller finances the buyer in the purchase of the property. So basically, the buyer would come to the seller and say, "Listen, I can't get a loan at a bank. I was hoping that you would fund me. You would provide the debt for me. So I'll buy it from you, but also get the loan from you." And sometimes sellers are amenable to this because they know if the new buyer screws up, they're first in line basically to get the property back. There's a concept called absorption, and this is very, very important in single family as well as the other property types. It basically is an estimate of how many properties or space a market will or can demand during one period. Oftentimes people will look at absorption to get an indication of how healthy a market is and to make projections on the future of whether it's a good time to start building single family houses. And lastly is the capture rate. The last term is what's called capture rate, And this is basically an estimate of how many of all the absorbed properties in a market during a period an individual developer can expect to either sell or to lease. That would be their capture rate. So obviously, you as a developer are not going to be the only person who is producing new single-family residences. So of all the absorbed of all the projected absorbed units or houses, you want to come to a determination of how much of that you will capture. So for your own pro formas. The subdivision process describes the legal and physical steps a developer must take to convert raw land into developable land. So this process generally takes place in 3 stages. The first is you acquire the raw land. The second stage is you turn it into semi-developed land, which basically means you divide it into a couple different acre tracts. You build roads and put in utilities basically that go up to the very edge of the property. And lastly, you develop or subdivide the land. You probably have platted it into individual loan sites, anywhere from half an acre, 1.5 acres to 10 acres, and it's ready and right for building. Land developers have got to remember that their product is an intermediate good used to produce an end product. The demand for finished lots rises and falls with the demand for houses and the price range that justifies the lot price. A land developer's profit is the difference between the revenues from land sales and the cost of purchasing the raw land, planning the project, acquiring approvals, installing infrastructure, and marketing that land to end users, which includes the operational and carrying costs of all those expenditures. The process of converting raw land to semi-developed land differs from region, depending upon the pattern of land ownership, terrain, and the capacity of local developers and financial institutions, legal frameworks of local state authorities, and the institutional mechanisms, public or private, for providing roads and utilities. Because large contiguous tracts of land rarely become available at one time, developers must sometimes assemble multiple parcels in separate deals. The fundamental difference between financial analysis for land development and other property types is that land is a for sale property, whereas apartments, offices, retail stores, and warehouses are income producing properties.